All right, so today we're diving into something that's pretty important, and especially if you're prepping for the UPSC exams.
Yeah,
It's about overseas Indians and how they participate or don't participate
yeah,
in Indian elections.
right.
So it's kind of a head scratcher, right?
Yeah, you'd think with so many Indians living abroad,
Right.
they'd be really eager to have a say in what's happening back home. But
Exactly.
the reality is a little more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the numbers from the 2024 Sabha elections,
Right.
nearly 1.2 lakh overseas Indians registered to vote. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
But when it came to actually casting their ballots,
Uh-huh.
less than 3,000 actually did. Less than 3,000. It's kind of wild, right?
It is. It is a really stark contrast between the enthusiasm, to sign up and then the actual follow through. For UPSC folks, this is a classic example of a topic that seems straightforward but has a lot of layers.
Totally. And,
Yeah.
we can't just chalk it up to apathy, right? There's got to be more to it.
Great. Absolutely. There are some very real obstacles in place. I think to understand why the turnout is so low, we have to start with the system itself.
The system, yeah. What's it like right now for NRIs who want to vote?
Well, first off, only non-resident Indians, so NRIs, who haven't become citizens of another country can even register.
Okay, so that already shrinks the pool of potential voters.
Exactly. And then even for those who are eligible, the process is, well,
Is it tough?
it's not exactly easy. They actually have to physically travel to their constituency in India.
Wow.
And they have to show their original passport at the polling station.
Really?
Yeah.
That seems like a huge barrier.
It is. It is a huge ask for someone who might be living thousands of miles away. And this whole process, by the way, only started in 2011.
Wait, before 2011, and NRIs couldn't vote at all?
Nope, not in the same way. So it's a relatively recent development.
Wow, that's pretty recent considering how large the Indian diaspora is.
Right. But even with this change, asking someone to fly across the world just to vote, it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot. And for our UPSC folks listening, this is something to really pay attention to.
Mhm.
These logistical hurdles, they play a major role in shaping how NRIs engage with Indian elections.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it definitely shines a light on why the participation rate's so low. So we've got the system itself, not exactly NRI friendly.
Right.
But what about the data from the 2024 elections?
Well, the data we talked about earlier, that only scratches the surface.
Oh, there's more to it.
Oh, yeah. If you look at things state by state, things get even more interesting.
Interesting how?
Well, some states, like Kerala, saw a relatively high number of NRIs voting, over 2,600.
Okay.
But then you have other states like Karnataka, Uttar Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, where there were zero, literally zero, overseas votes cast.
Zero.
Zero.
Here.
Even though there were registered NRI voters in those states.
Wow, that's a pretty drastic difference. So it's not just about the overall system, but also maybe something going on at the state level. Exactly. And this kind of variation is really important for UPSC prep. It highlights how the NRI voting issue isn't uniform across the country. There are regional factors at play. It could be anything from socioeconomic differences to even the political climate in a particular state.
Yeah, makes sense. And looking at some other states, Gujarat, only 2 out of 885 registered overseas voters actually voted. In Maharashtra, it was 17 out of over 5,000.
Right. Huge disparity.
Yeah, it's clear that low turnout isn't just about the hassle of travel. There's got to be more to the story.
Exactly. There's a lot more going on.
So far, we've talked about the travel, the cost. Are there any other major hurdles NRIs face when it comes to voting?
Well, I mean, the mandatory travel is definitely the biggest one. But the cost of travel, that's another hurdle, especially if someone's traveling with family. And then there's the time commitment, too. People have jobs, they might have kids in school. It's not easy to just drop everything for weeks and fly to India for an election.
Yeah, that's a tough sell.
Especially for NRIs who've built their lives abroad.
Right.
Taking that much time off can be really difficult. And beyond those practical things, it's also an emotional thing.
Emotional.
Yeah, for a lot of NRIs, even if they feel really connected to India,
Yeah.
they might still feel kind of disconnected
That's connected.
from the political stuff happening there. Like, their day-to-day life is totally different.
Right. It's like they care about India, but they're not living there anymore.
Exactly. Their priorities might be different. Their concerns might be different.
Yeah.
And, for our UPSC folks out there, this gets to the heart of the issue.
Okay.
Because it raises the question of how do you bridge this gap?
How do you make NRIs feel more like a part of things?
Right. More invested in what's going on politically. So even if they overcome all those travel hurdles and everything,
Yeah.
there might still be this kind of psychological barrier. It's like they're looking in from the outside.
And their voice doesn't quite reach.
Exactly. And this is where the conversation gets really interesting because it leads us to the proposed reforms.
The reforms.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. We keep dancing around those.
Well, let's dive in. Let's talk specifics.
Let's do it. So what are these reforms all about?
Okay, so there are two main proposals that have been getting a lot of attention.
Okay.
The first one is proxy voting. And this would be a pretty big change.
Proxy voting. Okay, I got to admit, I'm curious. How would that even work for NRIs?
So basically it means an NRI could choose someone they trust in India
Uh-huh.
to vote on their behalf.
So they wouldn't have to travel.
Exactly. No need to physically be there.
That sounds almost too good to be true. But wouldn't that open things up for problems?
Problems like,
Like manipulation,
yeah.
or someone pressuring the proxy to vote a certain way. And for our listeners who are prepping for UPSC, this is the kind of critical thinking that's super important. You can't just accept things on the surface. You got to think about the potential issues.
You're absolutely right. That's a legitimate concern. And it's
Yeah.
something that people are trying to figure out how to prevent that sort of thing.
So proxy voting, it's a cool idea, but the details matter.
Absolutely. They have to make sure it's done in a way that's fair and secure.
All right,
Yeah.
makes sense. What about the other proposal? What's the second reform idea?
So the second one involves something called the electronically transmitted postal ballot system.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, ETPCS for short.
ETPBS, okay. I think I've heard of that. Isn't that already being used for, like, military personnel?
You got it. Service voters, people who are stationed away from their constituencies, they're already using it.
Right, right. Could you refresh my memory on how it actually works?
Sure. So it's actually pretty simple. An NRI who wants to vote this way,
Mhm.
they would tell the returning officer.
The returning officer.
Yeah, that's the official in charge of elections in their constituency. They'd tell them like 5 days before the election, hey, I want to vote by postal ballot.
Okay.
And then the officer would send them the ballot paper electronically.
Electronically?
Yeah, digital.
Wow, technology.
Right. So the NRI would download the ballot paper, mark their vote, and then send it back.
Send it back how?
Well, along with the declaration that's been signed off by an Indian official
Got it.
in their country.
Okay, so like a digital version of the regular postal ballot. Convenient, but what about security?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Exactly. With all the talk about hacking and stuff, how do we know those votes are safe?
That's a really important point. And the Election Commission has actually proposed some pretty intense security measures. Like they're talking about digital signatures, encryption, multiple layers of verification, all kinds of stuff to prevent tampering.
Sounds like they're taking it seriously, which is good.
They are. They
Yeah.
really want to make this a reliable and secure option.
Okay, so even with these reforms being proposed, a part of me still wonders
Wonders what?
if there's something more fundamental going on here. Like, even if voting's easier, will that be enough to close that gap we were talking about?
That sense of disconnect?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. And honestly, there are some experts who think, even with all this, a lot of NRIs will stay detached from Indian politics.
Because their lives are just so different now.
Right. Their lives are tied to their new countries. Their priorities are different. It's not just about making voting easier. It's about...
It's about making them feel like they belong.
Exactly. Like their voices actually matter.
That's a tough one. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. It's not just about reforms. It's about really engaging with the diaspora.
Having conversations, understanding their perspectives,
Yeah. Creating ways for them to participate meaningfully. It's about building bridges.
not just shortcuts.
Yeah.
This is making me think about what it even means to be an Indian citizen in a world like this.
It's a huge question, right?
It is. It's a question for everyone, not just NRIs.
Yeah.
And for UPSC folks, this is something to really think about.
It is. It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer. But by talking about this stuff, by understanding the complexities of NRI voting, and by looking closely at these proposed reforms, we can start to move towards a better democracy.
So we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Started with this kind of puzzling statistic, tons of overseas Indians registering to vote, but then barely anyone actually showing up at the polls.
Yeah, we really dug deep into the why of it all, right? Uncovered all those hurdles, like the travel logistics, the cost, that feeling of disconnect some NRIs might have, and then the bigger question of what it even means to be an Indian citizen in today's world.
But we also talk about some potential solutions, like Those reforms, proxy voting, and expanding the ETPBS could really change things up.
Absolutely. And for all our listeners out there who are gearing up for the UPSC exams, this whole conversation's been a gold mine. It touches on so many key topics like diaspora engagement, electoral reforms, how democracy is changing, all stuff that could pop up on your mains exam.
For sure. Soaking it all in is definitely key. But even beyond memorizing all those facts and figures, what are some of the really important takeaways you think our listeners should be paying attention to?
Well, first off, I'd say it's crucial to understand the nuances of this issue. It's not as simple as saying NRIs just don't want to vote. It's about recognizing how complex their situation is, the challenges they face, the psychological barriers they might have.
Right. It's about trying to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. And second, being able to analyze those proposed reforms critically, that's huge. What are the potential upsides? What are the risks? How could those reforms actually impact the way elections work in India?
Yeah, being able to weigh the pros and cons and form an informed opinion, super important.
Right. And finally, connecting this whole issue to bigger themes like citizenship, globalization, the role of the diaspora in building a nation, that's key. Shows you're looking beyond just the surface level, you're digging into the deeper implications of it all.
It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And this isn't the end of the story either.
It's still unfolding.
The Election Commission is actively listening to what the diaspora has to say. They're exploring new ideas, constantly working to make the system more inclusive.
So it's important to stay informed, stay engaged, really keep those wheels turning in your head.
Exactly.
And if you found this deep dive insightful, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this episode with anyone else who's on that UPSC journey.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something that's sure to keep your minds engaged.
Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.